Okay. I'm certainly used to being a drug and alcohol counselor, so I'm not shy about talking. But I'm not used to standing behind one of these, so it's good. It's good. We'll make it work. You probably saw some background on me in the handout. But let me repeat some of it anyway and start to give you an idea. I've got about 45 minutes, right?
Yeah, and don't feel pressured. I mean, you have...
Well, I won't. Yeah, I won't. I don't know exactly how long it will take, but we'll see.
Scott, could
yeah.
you speak towards the mic?
Oh, this helps you?
Yeah.
Wonderful, I forgot my hearing
Okay.
aids.
Let me know if I drift off in terms of direction. Okay. Like the program says, I have been doing Zen meditation for a long time. Actually, it's longer than 30 years, more like 40 years. And like the program says, I'm a Zen teacher. I was transmitted as a Zen teacher 5 years ago. So that's one of the things that I do now. And I wanted to talk to y'all about several things regarding Zen Buddhism in particular. And I really encourage you to interrupt me by asking questions. So I don't mind questions at all, so don't hold back.
You're in for it now.
I know, but I'm good with it. I'm good with it. So basically what I have to say is going to have two focuses. One is to try to describe to you in a little bit of detail anyway that Zen has really gone a long way toward being Americanized, and to a considerable degree is well established in that way. At the same time, a focus I want to have in talking is that as I've been involved in Zen for a long time, and as the years have passed, I've come to have a little more concern about some of the differences in culture. Zen and Buddhism are products, or that's probably a terrible word for it, they come from the heart of Asian cultures. And they remain there. And those cultures are very different from our own in some significant ways. And I've come to believe that this can affect how people think about and consider meditation. Because meditation that comes to us from Asia has a very specific background that's congruent with that culture and still adapting to our own. So I want to start pointing that out. Now, the first point is to consider the environment in which Zen meditation developed, or really any Buddhist meditation. What was the environment that it came from? What were people doing as they developed it? Now, you may well know that ultimately this kind of meditation goes back 2,500 years. So let's cover that a little bit. So it's been around a long time, and it's developed over a long time. Zen in particular is said to have come to China from India about 600 CE, something like that. So it's been in China for a long time. And it came from China to Japan about 800 years ago.
What's CE?
Oh, AD.
Okay.
Common era.
Okay.
Common era. Okay, so it came to Japan about 800 years ago. And then it got to America in a significant way in the 1960s. So consider the time frames here and how different they are. It hadn't been with us very long. I think we've done a lot of adaptation to it, but consider how long it's been elsewhere. And so in getting to this first point about the cultural origin is to consider this. In Asia, Buddhism was transmitted from generation to generation, primarily in monastic settings. Now when I say monastic setting, I mean nuns and monks. I don't just mean guys, I mean nuns and monks. really what Buddhism tried to do from the beginning is to include women in their training. Now this was squashed to a considerable degree by the patriarchal Asian cultures. What do we got here? Oh, so you'll help me with that. But Asian cultures have been very patriarchal, so some of that, a lot of that has gotten squashed. But there has been an effort. At least the Buddhist culture has made at least gestures and efforts overall to be sure to include both genders in their practice. And I think they deserve some credit for that. But the truth is that monastic sanghas, and sanghas is the Buddhist word used to be the Buddhist word for the monastic community, did die out in some countries. It died out in Tibet and in another Asian country I can't remember. But the point that I'm trying to get toward here is that Buddhism was primarily transmitted and maintained within monasteries. And it is only, now in the U.S., I'll get to this in a little bit, it is primarily being maintained and developed by non-monastic settings, and that's a very significant difference. So why does that matter so much? Well, I'd like to share this. In 1976, when I started Zen meditation, that year I spent 2 months in a Zen monastery. Now this was a Zen monastery in Northern California. Whoop. Not close enough?
There.
Yeah, that was a little too far back. That's okay, sorry.
All right. And I spent 2 months in Shasta Abbey, which was founded in 1970 by a British woman who had gotten her Zen training in Japan. And so what I want to tell you, I was there for 2 months then, and then for 6 weeks in 1990. And I'm very grateful for that experience. But what I want you to know in terms of details is if you're in a monastery for any length of time at all, two things you learn right away is that every morning you're going to get up and meditate. And every evening, it won't be the last thing you do, but it'll be one of the last things you do that day, you're going to meditate. Every day, day after day after day after day. And this is what the people in monastic settings did, is it was daily meditation practice. And they got so used to it, they didn't even think about it. So why is it such a significant piece of information? Because meditation, Zen meditation, originated and developed and was maintained as a daily meditation practice. And it's important to get that across if people want to do that in America. You see what I mean? Now, as a Zen teacher, people will come by. We have a tiny little group at New River Yoga Studio in Fayetteville, and they really won't have any background in meditation, and they have never really thought about it that way. If I meditate, how often do I do it? If I feel like doing it, yeah. If I don't feel like doing it that way, do I just, like that? So it's something for a person to consider if they want to do Zen meditation and really do it in the way that it originated when it was given to us. You should probably, if you really want to do it, you're probably looking at a daily practice because it's set up that way and it has its history that way. Y'all can still hear me all right? This making sense so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, now it seems like maybe a small piece of information, but it's actually very important when a person comes to deal with meditation practice. So for this particular type of meditation, daily practice really matters, and I'm going to say more about why that does a little later. Okay? No questions so far? Okay. Let me shift and talk about the process of Zen coming to America. Like I said, when you think about it historically, how long it's been in these other countries, it has not been here very long. And yet, Zen has done well, I think, in establishing itself, well overall in establishing itself in this country. And this has happened in the last, 40 to 50 years? that's real progress. So I want to tell you several things about the Zen communities in America that are very different. See, I just went into, here's something that really comes out of Asian culture about sitting practice and why that's so important. I'm going to go in the opposite direction. Because Zen centers in America are very different from Asian sources of Buddhism, or Asian sources of Zen, in several ways. One of them is that about half of the Zen teachers in America are women. That's a big deal. Because they're not in Asia. They're not. And most Buddhist countries have monastic settings for women, but by no means are most teachers in those countries women. And half of the teachers here are women. That's an enormous transformation. And to me, I don't know about you, but to me that's very, very encouraging. Okay.
Do they even allow female teachers, monk, or nuns, I guess?
Yes. Yes, like I was trying to say, Buddhism overall has tried overall to make a difference in that direction, and there are places for women teachers, but you still have to encounter the reality of patriarchy in those countries. I'll give you a little detail on that. My first grand teacher in Zen was Roshi Okina, who was a British woman. She died in 1996. She founded the monastery I went to for 2 months, Shasta Abbey. She founded it in 1970. She was 38 years old when she got to Japan and entered a Japanese Zen monastery, one of the 2 major monasteries in the country, in the school of Soto Zen, which is one of the 2 major schools of Zen around. And it was a male monastery. And she didn't have an easy time there, to say the least. But there are monastic settings specifically for women, but her teacher wanted her there, so he could work with her, so she went there. So she had that background, and she was in Japan a total of 7 years. I think she was in the monastery about 4 or 5 years. And she was transmitted as a full Zen teacher and came to this country. And she taught here. Good. Okay. So that's an example of someone who went through some difficulties in her training, but completed her training in Japan and founded a monastery in this country and was the abbot of it for 26 years. So that's a heck of an accomplishment, I think. I hope that's a good example. My 2 Zen teachers right now are in the New River Zen community in Blacksburg. One is a man, one is a woman. They're both very experienced. So those are some examples. Does that kind of respond to what you were asking? Yeah. Okay. So like I said, about half the Zen teachers in America are women. A key difference also is that most Zen Sanghas, that's Zen organizations in this country that are practicing, are lay people. There are relatively few Zen monasteries in this country. There are some. You can find them, but there aren't very many of them. And that is a complete shift from anywhere in Asia. These are lay people in these communities, not monks, not nuns, by and large. And so the thing you may wonder about that is, are they stable? Can they hold together all right? Monasteries in Asia are very well known for their ability to stay together with the practice and stay together supporting each other. They're very, what's the right word for it?
Cohesive.
They're very cohesive and stable. But that's their culture over there. But the Zen Sanghas in this country are proving themselves to be stable so far overall. And that's holding together. I'm going to add some details about that later, about why that matters, and we'll get into that. So, traditionally, the word Sangha only applied to monks and nuns. But in this country, I think it needs to apply to anybody in one of these Zen communities. Anybody who's serious about practice is a member of the Sangha, because they're contributing to everybody else. Big difference also. Another huge change, and I think a very, very important one, is that most American Zen practitioners are probably not Buddhists. How about that? But they're probably, I don't know for sure, but just from trying to get the lay of the land, I think a lot of them, definitely a lot of them are not Buddhists. One of my two Zen teachers, that's Ellen, goes to church. Her teacher, so my grand teacher in the New River Zen community lineage, is a Jesuit priest. His teacher is a Jewish guy named Bernie. Bernie's teacher is a Japanese Zen priest named Taizen Mizumi, who founded the Los Angeles Zen Center in the 60s or 70s. So see how there's so much variety now. And for Roshi Kennedy, he has a Zen community in New York, in northern New Jersey. He has Buddhists in his community. He has Jewish people in his community. He has totally secular folks in his community. Everybody's welcome. Personally, I think that's really cool. But that's also been a huge shift, because now when you have sitting meditations together, like yesterday I went to Blacksburg and we sat in meditation all day from 9 to 3, and we had Zen talks and that type of thing. And when you hear the talks, what you're hearing about is Zen, as opposed to being a good Buddhist. And that's a heck of a shift. And I think it's a very encouraging one. Yeah.
I have I don't know if it's a comment or a observation, but one thing that I have learned, and feel free to correct me if this isn't true, is that there are actually quite a few Buddhist churches in this country. They'll say, Buddhist church, but the people who go to those churches aren't often Zen practitioners or even so much into meditation. It's more of a Christian slanted form of Buddhism. It's
Well,
kind of a strange,
You want a little on that? Is that okay? It's not on the outline. I don't care.
If you know something about it.
I went to one in New York City. My sister-in-law lives up there. I go up there about once a year. And it's like I wasn't staring at the signs and the walls to figure out getting it exactly right, but I'm pretty sure it was a Buddhist temple in New York. And it was probably devoted to what's called Shin Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism. And that's a very popular kind of Buddhism in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And you are right, it probably does not emphasize meditation in the way Zen does. And the basic belief is that since the path of meditation is so challenging and difficult, what its believers do is basically learn to ask one of the Buddhas, Amida Buddha, that upon this person's death, they can go to Amida Buddha's or Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land, where they will be able to be enlightened under more encouraging circumstances than being on earth. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, it has to do with
Yeah.
oranges and all kinds of.
Well, I don't know about oranges, but anyway, that's the basic idea. And there are many Buddhists in Asia who follow that. And you can kind of see the logic of it, because Buddhism originated from meditation. What's the basic story? And you can go check it out on YouTube. You can get the video pretty easy. Buddha's Life, YouTube. It's about an hour and a half, and it's just the story of the Buddha's life. And what's it all centered around? It's centered around the Buddha becoming, in effect, a monk on his own, and is doing his meditation practice for 6 years and reaching enlightenment. So the foundation of Buddhism was based on meditation and enlightenment. And the Zen Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism, came along later, because so many people just felt like they couldn't put that level of effort into meditation during this life, so they created an alternative. And there are some scriptures from India that support that go way back. So that's not what I'm talking about with Zen. Now, I have no, I don't even know how long I've been talking. How long have you been?
You have
21
plenty of
minutes.
time, Scott.
Yeah,
You're good.
yeah, don't
We're
worry.
halfway there. I'm not in a hurry,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to keep track.
That's
so-
about right.
Yeah, okay. We're good, so we're good. Now, the third part of what I wanted to cover is something that's been on my mind for a long time. The expectations, and let's look at our cultural background on religion, okay? Our religions are Judeo-Christian religions. And they tend to have very definite religious teachings and dogmas that are put out to us in the form of concepts, like there is a creator God who made the world in 6 days, and if you don't believe that literally, and I don't want to say something, I was about to say you're likely not to, but anyway, I don't want to be disrespectful. But even then, you may think, well, okay, it's like a story. It's a sacred story, and it has some value anyway. But it's very propositional. You know, there is a God. You should believe in this God. If it's a more conservative church, so you don't go to hell, and you're saved by Jesus, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but you see what I mean? All these things come out to you as propositions and concepts, and then you're faced with either accepting them or denying them. So, in our culture, when we're confronted with religion, we're used to this kind of approach, and it puts a lot of us off. Yes? Big time? Yeah, but that's, when we think of religion, that's kind of how that's what we get confronted with. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to it in any way, because it's meaningful to a lot of people. It's meaningful to a lot of people that I do drug and alcohol counseling with. So okay, but it puts a lot of people off, big time. And with the advance of science in the 1800s, Darwin, and so forth, that kind of religious stuff started looking like a fairy tale to a lot of people. And you just felt a lot better, just forget it. So, the reason I'm giving you this background right now is to talk about the difference in spiritual climate between our Judeo-Christian religions and the way Buddhism tends to approach it. I'm not talking about the Shin approach here, I'm talking about meditation-based approaches. People learning Zen from our culture can very easily experience it as pretty much secular. Because you don't get hit with all these ideas and propositions about a divine being and what happens, and you have to believe, and if you believe, you'll go to heaven, and there's a place made for you, and so on. When you approach something like Zen, basically what happens is you get taught how to do sitting meditation. And then you practice it, at least in our little group, that's what happens. People come and they practice it for 25 minutes with us, and we talk about their experience, and then decide if they want to come back. So you're taught how to do sitting meditation first, and we give them a little bit of background on Zen. Not as detailed nearly as what I've just told you. We give them a little bit of background once they have some idea where it's coming from, and how it's different from other forms of meditation that are emerging in our culture. But it basically feels pretty secular. And people are comfortable with that, and that's fine. But I'm just struggling for a way to say this. However, yeah.
I was just gonna say, it's, from my experience, it's the idea that your belief in it is irrelevant. If you do it, things will change. But whether you believe in it or not doesn't matter. You just do the practice.
I think that's the way I was shown too.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, because in Judeo-Christian religions, whether you're going this way or that way, it depends on your belief. That ain't how it is.
In other words, you don't go in looking for the leader to answer all of your great questions about life.
No.
You're not going to get that
No.
type of
But that's an
experience.
excellent point,
Right.
Clyde. I'm gonna borrow that in a second.
In my experience, with paganistic beliefs like Judaism, a lot of what you talk about with the active sitting meditation and the paganistic beliefs, most of the time you are born divine and you don't really have to believe in anything else divine, like a god or anything like that. I mean, sometimes they do. I mean, it's all personalized path. And one of the things that most of these paths do is thoughts are things too. It's one of the first things we're taught in our research, in our search for the knowledge that we look to personalize. One of the most common ones is thoughts are things too, and actively kind of try to change our thought, the way we think, so that we don't put out negativity with our own thoughts, which what it seems to me with the sitting meditation is kind of more like a, I guess you could say a walking meditation, where you
Well,
kind
some of it is
go in-
walking meditation.
Yeah, where you
Well,
kind of go through life.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna get into the details of sitting practice, but what the heck, a little bit. Basically,
Go wild.
in a way, that's not gonna happen. In a way, the Zen meditation is very simple. You sit still, and it's silent meditation. Now let me point out that, because what happens with a lot of people who come up to our little group is if they've experienced any meditation, the meditation they've experienced is what we call guided meditation, or voice-led meditation. And some Buddhist meditations are like that, but in general, about 90% of Buddhist meditation is certainly at least that much in Zen, more than that in Zen, is silent meditation. And silent meditation, let's make long story short, is hard work. I don't mean it's like that. It's not unpleasant, but it does take a willingness to be aware of how busy with thoughts our minds are. And that's why I'm responding to what you're saying a little bit. And basically the practice is to become aware of whenever we're caught up in thought, so what I call an emotion thought, and we simply bring our attention back to our breath. It's very simple, but it's real. People are shocked in the beginning at how busy their minds are, and you have to kind of tell them about that. You're off in your thoughts except for 3 seconds, right? And they go, yeah. And then you say, look, you may have a little trouble believing this. You just did a good job of meditation because you saw how busy your mind is. See? So that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that the meditation focuses on. And then it's a question of whether the person is just willing to do it or not. Now, with voice-led meditation can give, I believe, faster results in the sense of being able to calm you down. Soothing voice-led voice-led meditation, which I think has some relationship with hypnotic techniques, can calm you down pretty quickly. But that's not what Zen meditation is trying to do. And you actually brought this up, so I guess we're going there. I mean, good, but it's about awareness. The emphasis in Zen meditation is on awareness. And this is extremely deliberate all the way back.
So it's kind of like what with, I was talking about with going through life and trying to change the thoughts, like being
Well,
aware
if
of
you-
your thoughts.
The difference may be, is the more aware you are of your patterns of emotion thoughts, whether you're sitting on a bench or a cushion or not, the less likely you are to get caught up in them in a harmful and destructive way. Now, I think you're going there too, but I'm putting it a little differently.
Yeah.
You okay?
It's the difference in difference yet parallel.
Yeah,
with the
very,
difference
very parallel,
between
and I would
culture.
agree that the awareness of those thoughts and not simply getting engulfed by them is very important and helpful.
And I've noticed that in trying to do what you were talking about actively in my lifestyle every day, which is what a lot of pagan beliefs is, it's kind of hard to like notice that I'm getting caught up in my thoughts. I'm getting caught up in
It is.
negativity. I need to calm down and think
It
and be
is.
like, this isn't helping the situation. What I need to do is change how I see it.
Yes, it's
Take a step back.
the awareness is all about that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's a bit of a shocker when you start doing this kind of practice, because I remember in 1976, I called the monks up from where I was living in Texas, and I said, all I do is think. And you know what the monk on the phone said? Said, good. And I said, I didn't say, what the hell, because he was monk, but the point he made is, now you're really becoming aware of your thought patterns and how powerful they are. So, yeah.
May I interject something? And again, feel free to correct me, but from what I have experienced, the big difference may be that when you're involved in a Zen practice, it's less about trying to change your thought patterns and more about
Awareness.
not thought, letting go of the thoughts.
Well, becoming aware of thoughts and bringing your attention back to your breath or body, and that's what lets them go. You don't have to make them go. I banish you. No,
Right.
you don't have to make them go. You use awareness. And I keep coming back to the word awareness, but it's fundamental as practice. You use awareness of those emotion thoughts, you bring your attention back to your breath or body, and then they go on their own. And that's how you do it. Does that respond to that?
Yep.
Okay. So Clyde, you were going somewhere I thought good, and then I lost it here. So
Oh, well, I was in
can you
a
go back to what you were
totally
saying?
different, I was talking about other in comparison with other traditional religions.
Oh, okay.
As far as the seeking the answers to the great questions.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's
the
where we're
totally-
going. Okay.
Well, you mentioned the term expectations.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
go to a religious service, sometimes you have those kinds of expectations from some religions, but
Yeah.
not
Yeah. That's a
not
good
for
direction. So
meditation.
let's go there. Like I said, when we encounter this kind of practice in our culture, compared to what we've seen with our own culture's religious traditions, it may seem almost like a secular practice. And that's fine. But what I want to point out to you, and this is really the final point, is that I believe Asian cultures looks at this religious stuff in a fundamentally different way than we do. In Asian cultures, a lot of Asian cultures I think they get it, that the kind of thing that is going to be really helpful to a person is a direct experience of spirituality rather than a bunch of preaching and dogmas and ideas. It needs to be a direct experience. And that's very much what this tradition is doing. The reason the meditation is so carefully preserved from generation to generation to generation is because of its capacity to do exactly that. That's the reason. The meditation that we do in Blacksburg and up in Fayetteville is basically almost exactly the same as the meditation we're doing in China 800 years ago. Now that may be a surprise, but that's how carefully that culture has preserved it. And personally, from my own experience, I think with good reason. So you see what I mean about cultural differences here? This is significant, it seems to me. So let's go into differences in how that culture, that meditation-oriented Buddhist culture, expresses spirituality. And then maybe give you, I'm not going to take a lot of time on this. Roshi Kenneth, that's the woman who founded the monastery in California and who spent those years training in a monastic situation in Japan. When she got with her American and British students, would say, she would refer to a Buddhist sutra called the Udana scripture. Udana, E-U-D-A-N-A, Udana scripture. And she would quote a line for them over and over again. And the line is, "O monks, there is an unborn, undying, unchanging, uncreated." That's what Buddhists say. A little different from our traditions, isn't it? An unborn, undying, unchanging, uncreated. That's the way of putting it. Okay. And here is what Roshi Kenneth said in elaborating about that within Buddhism. She said, the Buddha explained this by what is called the via negativa. He explained it by what it is not. It isn't born because it has always been there. It is a capital I. It doesn't change because it is eternal. It is not created. There is nothing greater than it. The Buddha goes on and so on and so on. The Buddha goes on in the scripture to say, if this were not so, there would be no hope whatsoever for humankind. Now, it's just as good to explain what you know to be true by saying what you know it isn't, as it is to say that you know as it is to say what you know to be true by saying what you believe that it is. In our culture, it's saying what it is. That's these religious propositions I'm saying you get. In the Buddhist tradition, it's the opposite. They talk about what it isn't. Completely the opposite. Now, why would they do that?
So leave you open to your own experience.
Yes. That's precisely the reason. It's exactly what the reason is. So that you don't go off drawing a whole bunch of, getting into some kind of religion or spirituality and drawing a whole bunch of, unpredictable conclusions. They want you to experience this directly for yourself. And that's why they're not going to put a lot of religious ideas and a lot of religious structure in your brain when you're doing this meditation. If you experience it directly for yourself, you'll know. You won't need an explanation. But the most radical thing I'm saying today, and the thing that may be the hardest to swallow, is that this tradition has been the way it is because this does happen. And what it's called is a direct experience of essential nature. That's what it's called. And in Japanese, the word for it is kensho. And let's try to put it this way. If you do this practice, you never know when that might happen. Some people do this practice for a lifetime, and that never happens. There's no guarantee with it. some people, a significant number of people who practice this meditation diligently and stick with it for a number of years will have that experience sooner or later. Some people who practice this for decades, 30 years maybe, may have that experience then. You never know. It is, when it happens, it is usually the last thing you're expecting to have happen. It comes out of the blue. So yeah, Buddhism is Zen Buddhism, all Buddhism, just about. I think Shen Buddhism is a little different. But the point is, it's spiritual too. But it's got a different strategy and a different approach. Now, I'm going to say this a little bluntly now, sorry?
Are we speaking of the Zen or the Buddhism?
Well, both. But I'm speaking more specifically about Zen, so thanks for getting me straight on that. Yeah. It's spiritual too. But the strategy it uses is almost completely different from religions that come out of our culture. And I think it's important to get up here and start saying that kind of thing. Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, and it's very understandable that it would be misunderstood. The practice that seems totally secular one day could the next morning turn into something that's more spiritual than you could ever imagine through your own experience. But that's how it becomes that, not because somebody else has sold you a bunch of ideas. Okay. I guess to start winding this up. Is this surprising what I'm telling you right now? No?
It's helping me clarify my
Thank you,
thoughts.
that's the idea. That's the idea, because it's not easy to walk into another culture's spiritual approach and have it make sense. But it really is different. I mean, obviously I like the Zen tradition, but I'm with the Asians in this all the way. You know, why talk a whole bunch about this spirituality stuff until you know it for yourself? And then you can talk about it, because you know. Okay. Now this is I want to kind of wrap it up with this one. This is a comment, it's a very short one, by a Chinese Buddhist teacher named, I will totally mangle this pronunciation, Master Suan Hua. That has probably nothing to do with how you really pronounce it, but that's my effort. But he was born in 1918 and he died in 1995. And he was a Chinese monk. And not to get all tangled up in history, but after Zen came to Japan in about 800 years ago, in China, Buddhism kept changing. So the name for it in China is Chan, C-H-A-N. So it continued to change in China, whereas in Japanese said, this is good, we're going to preserve it. So the Japanese haven't changed Zen very much from when it came over. But anyway,